Hi, everyone, and thank you for tuning in tonight to our second live event. Everyone, thank you for showing up tonight. We're super excited to be out here in the courtyard of the beautiful night in Chicago in the Fine Arts Building and to be hosting two of my favorite writers and people in the multiverse. Tonight, we are going to host Catherine Lacey for the release of her incredibly wonderful and weird, lovely, all those other great things, novel Q, which just came out today, right?
In paperback, yeah.
Yes, and Maryse just showed you the hardcover, which is gorgeous. They're both gorgeous, but she's going to be in conversation with Maryse Meijer here tonight, one of our other favorite people and writers in Chicago. And this is Maryse's latest, Seventh Mansion. Both in our new and improved and very new website, Exile book bill. You can order from this direct these days as opposed to the old-fashioned way. It's a virtual event, and it's also a live event. You can't see the crowd behind you, but we're very excited to have you all here. I'm going to do away with the bios because everyone knows about these two. I just want to say that they are really two of my favorite writers. They give so much back to, at least to me. But they're really great literary citizens of Chicago, and we're so happy to have them here. So I'm going to pass it off to Maryse because we have a lot planned tonight, and take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody who came. Thanks to this beautiful space that we're so lucky to enjoy for people who are not here. Here, we live in Chicago. It's amazing. Built a great bookstore in a space that has been holding bookstores for many, many decades. So, yeah, good feng shui here.
With a laptop in front of our face.
Distracted by it. Is there anyone? Yes, I can't see you over there. Thank you. Catherine is not only a writer that I really admire since the first book came out, but also a really good friend. And so just bear with me because it's nerve-wracking all the time to talk to writers about their work, but it's especially nerve-wracking when it's somebody that you love as a person as well as an artist. So forgive me if I'm a little anxious, but this book made me cry twice. First time I read it, and then earlier today when I finished it. I don't want to cry right now, but it's a good book. So how many people have read it? So. Ooh. All right, well, I'll try. I have a bad reputation for reading the end books to people out loud. And I kind of wanted to read the last page.
Do it. It's the paperback release. I don't think you can give anything away in this book.
No, that's true.
But I first wanted to point out something which people would know, and I am afraid that I will forget it later on in the evening, but I think I wrote Pew and you wrote Seventh Mansion, like maybe we didn't really know each other when we were writing those books. And then we became friends when we were done with them, but they hadn't come out yet. And then they came out they came out in the galley and stuff, and I read Seventh Mansion and I was like, this is so similar. Like Seventh Mansion and Pew they're like cousins or siblings or something. They're like very related in a kind of weird way. I think both like aesthetically and in like its message and sort of ethos. And I was like, kind of like, I just very excited about that. Like when you like get to know like a new person and then you realize like, oh, we've been thinking the same thoughts like up until now. And then like, I think some of our like older stuff too, like has some like echoes, but I think this is like the most intense one. It's like, oh, of course I would like meet this person, become friends with her, like right when we're working on kind of like similar ideas. Yeah. So I feel very like related to you in like a kind of foundational way. And I feel like Pew is a sort of, it's attached to the first time that I read Maryse's work, and then also just like the first time we got to know each other as people. So it's nice to have you here. We're both gonna cry.
I mean, I think that's partly the reason why this book is emotional for me, is because I think it says, or not says, but it has the atmosphere of some of the things that I didn't say in my book, but that I felt that makes sense. And so it's
Same,
like,
vice versa. It's like the
Yeah.
things that were left out somehow, or the things that were sort of implicit, I feel like they were kind of mirroring each other in that way.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so now I feel like I just feel relieved, like, okay, I just like sucked at like doing this other thing.
No.
Like, Catherine did it, and that's
Stop.
fine. But no, but I mean like the two, then they're like you said, they're siblings.
I refuse this
Are really uncomfortable
characterization.
brothers and sisters.
Down. Okay. He's
Okay,
not here.
before we start reading the book and talking about it, I wanted everyone to write down on this beautiful piece of paper that I gave you two things. One, something about yourself that you wish people knew, but that they don't know. And then number two, something that you wish people, or that you hope people never know about you. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to read them. You're not going to have to share them with anybody. But I do think the act of writing it down is important rather than just thinking in your mind what it might be. So if everyone can just take a minute to do that for me. And then we'll think more about what you wrote.
Oh, I have to do it
You
too.
have to do it too. I was thinking I was going to have a hard time doing this because I have a twin sister. If anybody knows me, knows that she knows everything. So it doesn't count for me really, but
I have to think about it more. I wasn't thinking about having to do it myself when you said you were going to do this.
well, you're like everyone
But I really
else.
like this question a lot. I really like this question a lot. Like, I think it could be something a person asks themselves like repeatedly and sort of thinks about the relationship between these things. And why would you not want anybody to know these things, or would want somebody to know
yeah.
these things? Anyway, say again.
No.
We've had a request for Maryse to repeat herself, but with different language. Well, but maybe German. Maybe
So I
so.
need the Jesse translator.
The Jesse translator. I will translate this into Jesse for you. I don't know if I speak Jesse actually. You're supposed to come up with a truth about yourself that you don't even want yourself to know, much less somebody else. And then one that you feel like you should get more credit for, and everybody hopefully would know about you. Does that work? Did I translate it? Okay. Well, that's what we got.
What's that? Oh yeah, of course. If you're watching from elsewhere in the interwebs, you do it too. Of course, everyone. If you're watching from the future,
If you're watching from the past, stop.
I don't want anyone to see my answers.
Oh.
I think most people are done. If you're finishing up, that's fine. So before I read a selection from the book, I want to frame some of the conversation with one of the ideas that I find really fascinating about the book, and maybe that can help shape the conversation a little bit, which is the relationship between disclosure and community, and privacy and publicity within ourselves and between other people. I mean, in my novel that Catherine was talking about, The Seventh Mansion, the question of community is really central to it, but in a way that I think people didn't pick up on, sadly. But in this book, it's really explicit in a way that is very challenging and sensitive and complex. And so just keep that in the back of your minds as we're talking about the book today, and as I'm reading 2 sections, I'll read some from the beginning of the book, and then I just have to read the last paragraph. It's really good. So apologies if you don't like that. But all right, the first section is called Sleep. If you ever need to, and I hope you never need to, but a person cannot be sure. If you ever need to sleep, if you are ever so tired that you feel nothing but the animal weight of your bones, and you're walking along a dark road with no one, and you're not sure how long you've been walking, and you keep looking down at your hands and not recognizing them, and you keep catching reflection in darkened windows and not recognizing that reflection, and all you know is the desire to sleep, and all you have is no place to sleep. One thing you can do is look for a church. What I know about churches is that they usually have many doors, and often at least one of those doors, late at night, has been left unlocked. The reason churches have so many doors is that people tend to enter and leave churches in groups, in a hurry. It seems that people have a lot of reasons for entering a church, and perhaps even more reasons for leaving one. But the only reason I've gone to a church was to sleep. The reasons I've left a church were to avoid being caught sleeping, or because I'd already been caught sleeping and was being asked to leave. Those are the only reasons I can remember, though I'm having trouble lately with remembering. I left someplace, began walking, slept in all those churches, and everything else happened. That's all I know. Let's skip ahead a little bit to the next section. In a gas station bathroom, piss on the floor, tampon machine, urinal, and open stall, I locked the door and stripped bare to throw water on myself. In a cracked mirror, I saw these legs, saw these arms. I shut my eyes and tried to remember that body. But under shut lids, the mind saw nothing, could not remember in what it was living. Again, I opened my eyes, saw this body, maybe wider in some places, narrower in others, and some parts were soft and some were firm. And where my legs met, there was something I knew to protect, though I could not say why. When I put clothes on again, all memory of what this body was or is vanished beneath the cloth. It must be that I, whatever I am lying on the floor of the canoe, lying there, looking up at the sky. I am unable to sit up or move. Cannot remember getting into the canoe. Sometimes I hear people speaking to the canoe as if they are not aware that I am here. Yes, that's what it feels like, what living feels like. Why is it so difficult to say as much? It never seems I can describe it clearly enough. Once someone said I had a slender neck, a woman's neck, they said, a woman's neck growing from the thick shoulders of a man, but maybe it was the other way around, slender shoulders and a thick neck. Anything I remember being told about my body contradicts something else I've been told. I look at my skin and I cannot say what shade it is. I look into a mirror and see nothing in particular. It seems I'm sitting somewhere within all this skin and muscle and bone and fat and hair. Can only other people tell you what your body is? Or is there a way that you can know something truer about it from the inside, something that cannot be seen or explained? Over time, I know bodies change. They expand and contract. Skin turns papery or thick. New bodies grow within our bodies. Limbs grow musky and must be cleaned. Organs smuggle tumors through the dark. But isn't there something else, something unseen? Why can't we ever speak to it? In a gas station late at night, the cashier gave me a biscuit and a wet hot dog. She showed me black and white photographs of herself from long ago. A young woman in high white boots, short hair round and firm and pure black. There in the gas station, her hair had gone loose and gray. She did not ask me my name. She called me baby, called me sugar, gave me a sip of whiskey from her flask and let me sleep behind the counter. We were some distance from anything else, flat nothing around us, an unearthly glow rising from a town on the horizon. I slept on the floor while she sat up on a stool, holding a newspaper in her lap, the other hand resting near a rifle. She was one of the few I've known who somehow knew to peer over the edge of this canoe and see me lying there. Hello. What are you? I was sometimes asked, and I know it's rude to answer a question with a question, but I have sometimes allowed myself to be rude in this way. I used to ask those askers, what are you? And what a horrible question to say or hear. I regret ever asking it. Sometimes they answered me, I'm a Christian, an American, I'm Black, white, not from here, I'm hungry, I'm tired, angry, a woman, a man, a gay man, a pastor, Republican, mother, son, I'm 43 years old, I'm homeless. Or sometimes they answered me with a laugh that rose and fell in their chests before it wandered away, leaving nothing. When dawn came that morning in the gas station, the cashier gave me a carton of milk, said to come back if I ever needed. She never asked me what I was. In the dark of the night, with no one else around, she spoke to me. I'm the only one who will work on Sunday. They all want to buy gas on Sunday, sure, but don't ask them to sell it. Strange thing is, people not working on Sunday is all that makes this place any good, but it's also everything that's wrong with it. She was quiet a long time, shaking her head, rifling through the newspaper. Anyway, the only good preacher I know isn't sitting up in any church just to get looked at. She's just the one that keeps the children all day and sits in the hospice at night. She don't say nothing about God, the Bible. Don't have to. You see the way those children look at her. Ask them what they know about it. They know plenty. Yeah. The whole book is like that. It's just like poetry. And Catherine, do you want to tell us what it's about?
What's it about?
Who is Pew?
It's weird because like at this point now, like the book came out in the pandemic, so did it come out? It's like it's very like disembodied like experience which you had too of like, I don't know. Like I've been thinking about it for a long time, but also like I haven't been thinking about it for a long time now, and so I don't remember like actually what's in there. And then also when you have to read your own work, you can't really hear it. You just kind of like, I was thinking about the times that I've read that same section, and I just sort of like go into the groove of like, I wrote it over, a year or more, and like kind of knew the rhythm of that section maybe too well by the time I actually had to read it to somebody else. And so I hadn't heard it really until I heard you read it just now.
Did you like it?
I did like it. It's kind of weird. I mean, your reading of it was really great, and also different from the way that I hear it in my head, which is pleasant. Yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing where you can never really read your own book,
Yeah,
and
it's a weird thing.
it is kind of weird, and but the closest you can get to it, I feel like, is hearing somebody else read it. But also that can be like some of the worst experiences too. Like I've actually had the opposite where like one time, like, yeah, I'm not gonna get into that. Anyway, it was bad, but this was good. Maybe the book was bad. Like maybe actually like that book that other person was reading, like I didn't know that I hated it. But what is you asked me what the book was about. Well, I feel like there's other books maybe that are like about something, but I feel like this one is more.
It's a
like,
cloud.
It's a cloud. No, it's like a
Cloud.
space.
It's
I feel like that's kind of like crazy to say, but it feels like it's like I wanted it to be more of a like space for people to think in, and for it to be a little bit more like there is a narrative, and there's a person that comes to town. It takes a week, and like they kind of go from point A to point B, and there's this town is trying to figure out what to do with a stranger. That's like the narrative conflict. But I feel like other than that, I like this. I hadn't thought about it. This question that you asked at the beginning of like, what's something you don't want people to know about you versus something you do want people to know about you. I feel like it's actually about that, but I hadn't thought about it like that. It's maybe that's what it's about. I didn't know until you told me.
My work here. Yeah, for those who haven't read it, pew is the name given to a person found sleeping on a pew in a church. And they don't say their name, they don't say where they're from, they don't say how old they are, they don't say what gender they are, what ethnicity, and everyone has different ideas about who this person is. And it becomes more and more tense for the people in this small town as pew silence increases. Their sense that there's something wrong or something that they have to extract from pew by force grows over time. But I agree with what you said. It is very much the book is a feeling, and that's what I love about it, and that's what I look for in books, and that's what I feel like as a writer I'm most interested in as well.
But I just realized, like, even as I was writing it, I think I was thinking about Pew from the perspective of the town a lot more than I was thinking about Pew from their own perspective. And like, I mean, part of that is because like Pew doesn't seem to have, or this person that is called Pew doesn't really have any fixed memories about what's happened to them and why they're there. And so when you have a character that doesn't speak and doesn't have any memories, like I was never thinking about what Pew wanted, you know, and like the town is never thinking about what Pew wants or anything like this. And I don't even think Pew is thinking about what Pew wants. But if I was to pose this question that you posed at the beginning of like, you know, this duality of something you would want people to know and something you wouldn't want people to know, I'm not sure how Pew would answer it or if they even could. But I was about to say, like, they're human and so they could. Like, there's like these two impulses in people where there's like a sense of wanting to be a public thing and wanting to be seen, and then also there's parts of us that don't want to be seen and want to, like, you know, there's certain parts of ourselves that we want to keep private, and that, you know, there's such thing as shame. But I'm not even sure if like Pew ever experiences shame or anything like that. Like, I'm getting very into like the weeds of like, I'm having a kind of crisis about my own book right now. Welcome to the weeds of my crisis.
Well, I mean, I think you put you in a crisis to read it, because all of these questions are being asked. The book does not answer them, and it's not interested in answering them. But the book is also feels like a pressure to think about them, at least, and to examine them. And I mean, the book is from Pew's perspective, so it's interesting to have a character, a book told in the first person, who doesn't have a backstory, which is something that I hate. If anyone's ever heard me talk about writing or books.
Backstories?
I'm
You hate
always just like,
backstories?
I don't like that there's always this, you know, people in workshops where they're like, well, what happened to make the person who they are? And like in this book, everyone feels like they can't know Pew unless they know who Pew was. And it makes them really angry and disoriented and upset. And then there are many points in the book where the townspeople, out of a genuine desire to connect with Pew, feel like they need this information, even though everyone keeps saying,
yeah,
I don't care what you are.
Mm-hmm.
Like almost everyone
Mhm.
says, like, it doesn't matter to me. And people say that in real life all the time. Like, I don't care if you're Black, if you're white, if you're a man or a woman. But obviously you do totally care, because those things are important to most of us. And they shape our perceptions of our experiences. And so to have someone who, by remaining silent and choosing to not disclose those things, it becomes a challenge and not merely like a Bartleby-esque refusal. It's like, it's also seems aggressive or violent to these people that Pew does not.
That Pew's like identity is being withheld from them feels like a violence that the community is like taking on.
Yeah.
I mean, but the weird thing is, like, it sort of would be, you know, like I feel like if like a person walked in right now and we all had like different points of view on like what like they were in any way and nobody could agree. I mean, maybe like if you saw this person, you could see some characteristic about them, you'd be okay with it. But then if you had a conversation with the person next to you and they were like, oh, well, this, you know, that woman that just walked in, you're like, no, that was absolutely a man. Like, oh, no, they were Black. No, they were white. No, they were Asian. No, they were this. And it's like, if everybody disagrees about who that person is and you can't have consensus with the people around you, then you kind of realize that actually like these little things that we think are not that important are actually like very important. And beyond just like race and gender and everything, but like, you know, do they seem nice? Do they seem like sinister? Do they seem this? Do they seem that? I feel like when you have like a disagreement with a friend or your partner or somebody close to you about like, you know, you meet somebody one time and then you're talking about them later and you're like, oh yeah, like I met that guy Joe. He's like super nice guy. And then like your friend is like, no, oh, he seems awful. Are you kidding me? Like he seems kind of evil. And you're like, whoa, did we meet the same Joe? You know? And like maybe we didn't, and maybe like both of us are wrong, but like you want to have consensus with people that you're closest to.
And even people that you may not be closest to, but just that maybe the definition of a community is that we agree on who we are and who other people in the community are and what's important to us together. And then Pew as a person who challenges that just by existing in a body that can't be interpreted really with consensus. Like, what does that mean then for what a community does with those types of people?
Yeah.
Do you
I feel like
expel
the
them?
one thing that irritated me, and now I'm gonna have just like a little bitch session about like bad takes, was like that the book, the subject of the book, and I feel like this, you know, if you want to have a really ungenerous reading of it or lazy reading of it, I think you can come to this conclusion. But that the book was about like if appearance matters or not, like the appearance of something or of a person, and like of course our appearance matters, like I'm like that's kind of like a given. Like if I walk in this room naked, people are gonna be like, I don't know if she's okay, you know, like maybe we should get her some clothes, like, you know, she's sort of presenting in this way that's like not okay right now, even though it's a really nice night, we could all be naked. But you know, like of course, like the way that we present ourselves, like there's some like value in that, and it's not like, and that's not necessarily bad or good, it's just sort of like it's in fact the way we navigate the world. But I feel like the book was sort of like pushing sort of behind that like truth, you know, really kind of going around it and thinking about like, well, like how can I come up with a fictive world where there's somebody who doesn't have an appearance, and how would we navigate around that person? Not like, oh, they look this way or that way. It's like literally we don't know what they look like.
Right.
Somehow they're taking up space and also not taking up space at the same time. I mean, it's a, you know, it can't happen. Like that's why it's fiction. Like I kind of like hate this when people get really lazy. I mean, this is what another thing I love about Seventh Mansion. The primary character is having like a relationship with a skeleton, and like, is it happening in real life? Is it not happening in real life? Like,
as if that matters. Like,
it's a book.
Happening. It's happening in the book.
It's the one thing you can do in fiction. Like it is the one thing you can do in fiction. You don't even have to do any special effects. You don't have to hire anybody to do anything weird. It's like the best thing to do in fiction is to do things we can't do in real life in some way, you know. And that's not to say like to go completely like sci-fi genre or something, but like take this world and then take some aspect of it that is certain and then make it not certain, and then like live in that world for a little while. Like why not do that? Not that every book needs to be that way, but I feel like there's like this like there's a kind of like obsession with like kind of straight realism right now, and nobody's really been talking about it anymore. Or I'm sure somebody has been, but like I feel like it's sort of the volume on that conversation has been turned down a bit, about like what's the function of realism in fiction in general. And I'm not going to make an argument for or against like straight realism, but it just seems like you should be able to mess things up, you know.
It also seems ridiculous because that's my twin and I always talk about. It's like things that are called realistic or realism. Nothing is like living life. Like if there's no book where you're like, this is exactly like the experience I'm having right now in my body in this moment, talking to you. Like you can't, but you have things that we call realistic that we say like that's an approximation. But nothing is like, I don't know if you can.
Everybody's realism is different. I'm sure Faulkner felt like he wrote straight realism, you know?
Yeah, it's like it's specific to like all of these factors that you can't fit into one thing. So to me, that question just seems like ridiculous. And then the other part of that that's so annoying is that the focus then becomes on if we're talking about a book where it's happen or not, it's realistic or not. If we decide that it's not realistic, then it becomes a metaphor, and then we have to decide what the metaphor is. And then Pew becomes a metaphor for like the current moment, and then people are just like, it's about gender dysphoria, or it's about race relationships, and like all of those elements are in there because it's written in a time when those things are happening and those discussions are being had. But like to erase the realness of the character within the text, I think is always a sin.
It reminds me of like I was kicked out of AP English in 11th grade because I wasn't like serious enough about literature, because I really didn't know how to write the essay that was like in the Awakening by Kate Chopin, like it is about like this is the color blue has functions as a metaphor. I couldn't do any of that. Like I hated that, and so I was kicked out of AP Literature. And but I feel like that there's still like a tendency now, and it's worse for poetry. Like the poets are still like this, where that like people that don't read poetry, like they feel like they're not allowed to read poetry because they feel like they have to like see what the metaphor for something is and interpret the poem correctly, which is just a tragedy. I feel like we can just blame like AP literature teachers in American high schools for. But yeah, this kind of like idea that the book has to be interpreted in some sort of like kind of strict metaphorical sense is like
you're
just
setting
sad.
a trap for us.
Yeah.
And we have to like make sure it
Decode it.
Slam down our
Yeah.
midsection. Which I'm gonna ask a question that is annoying, but I noticed that Pew eats a lot of black foods.
Huh.
I think, and by a lot I mean 3.
But three is
There's like
it's
a
a trend.
black piece of meat, and then there's something else.
So there's a black cake. I remember the
And there's
black
a black
cake.
cake, and then there's like a pie that's bleeding blackly.
Okay.
What am I supposed to say about that in my essay about your novel?
Oh boy, that's a cute question, isn't it? I hadn't really thought about it. There's a lot of food in the book, but
There is a lot of food, yeah.
but it's mainly because I feel like that's the like the community that I'm from. If like somebody shows up, you just like you can't even help it. You just like create food. Like households just like start making foods and putting out like cheese cubes, and like it's just this like mania of like Southern culture of like we must feed you now, you know. So but I feel like that's a through line. Like a lot of cultures have a kind of like manic food response to a stranger coming in, you know,
yeah.
like almost all kind of tight knit cultures do this, which I think is funny.
Well, and Jesus demands that you feed a stranger, right?
That's true. That's true. A lot of people probably wouldn't remember that verse, but it is true. Yeah. I don't know. Just sort of like gives almost people to do something to do with their hands.
Yeah,
you know,
while they're like trying to figure out what you are.
Yeah, or like while you're writing a book and you have characters, and you're like, what are they doing? Well, just give them some food. Like,
they're eating something creepy.
Yeah, black. I don't know. And
then, I mean, there are a couple elements in it where there's, aside from the issue of Pew being an impossible person, there are moments in the text where there's like another uncanny element, like there's an empty room in someone's house. There's what's her name, Kitty, this alcoholic lady, who's really great. She has this huge immaculate house, and as Pew's walking through the hallways, they notice that there's one huge room that's just empty, but it's just in one line, and we don't talk about like, why is this room completely empty? And then there's people disappearing in another town, and I wrote down there was another thing that
Yeah,
I
feel like I remember
Hilda getting in the trunk.
Well, Hilda getting in the trunk. I feel like that's the first thing that happens. It's like, this is not exactly reality. Like there's not enough room in a car. And so like there's a mom and she's like, don't worry, I'll just get in the trunk, you know, and she just gets in the trunk, which I feel like is like almost believable. Like potentially like some moms have gotten in that trunk. Yeah. If they have to, they're like, the kid gotta be in the car seats and like, we got a visitor and so it's gotta be in the front and like, I'll just get in the trunk, you know? It seemed logical to me. But like just over the edge of like, just over the edge. And I was like, I feel like when that moment occurred when I was working, I was like, oh, that needs like, I need to find those moments again of like when some community member does something that's just like, it was right next to real, but just a hair over real. And I feel like a weird thing that happens, at least for me, like long after a book comes out, is I'm like, I don't think I put enough. I think that was like a dial that I didn't turn up enough. Like I feel like but it's still in there. Maybe I should thank God I didn't turn that dial up, because people would be like, why is everybody like constantly doing insane things in this book?
Well,
it's distracting.
I think if you'd gone farther with it, then it would have made us question like Pew more, because I mean, when you said
or like the reality of the community would have been like weirder.
Yes, and then it becomes like a David Lynch movie, which
Right.
is a valid thing to
Maybe,
be.
yeah.
But I brought this book of photographs by Gregory Klutzen. We'll just look at it afterwards, because I was thinking that your book has the same feeling that these photographs, which if people know how Klutzen works, he stages them all. They're all like sets, but they are meant to look handed in a certain way, but they don't. They look like sets. But I mean, like this is a living room that could be in the book, or like you just look at this picture and like, what's ominous about it? I don't know. Like, where does that sense of the uncanny or dread come from? And maybe it's that sense that it's, even if you don't know how Klutzen makes the pictures, you just know that there's something off about them.
Yeah.
This amazing.
Well, he reminds me of, can anybody think of that photographer? Eggleston. Is it William Eggleston?
Okay, yeah, but I was
Yeah.
gonna bring, and I
But
was
he
gonna
doesn't
use it
stage
as an
stuff.
example of how it's obvious.
Well, see, okay, the funny thing about Eggleston is he did a lot of his like most important work in the South and like in East Tennessee, or no, West Tennessee, like in Memphis, and like, which is the area where I'm from. And like, I feel like you showed me these pictures earlier and I was like, yeah, this looks like a living room, this looks like this. But I feel like the South sort of has this thing where like everything looks a little bit staged. Like I feel like if you all went to my father's house, you'd be like, what is wrong with this house? And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just like, that's how he put it together on purpose, you know? This is no dig on my dad. He has like pretty good taste, but there's something kind of odd about it, about the house. And I felt it even as like, being born there. I was like, what's wrong with this house?
Well, didn't somebody compare this novel to James Purdy?
Yeah, and then I had never read any James Purdy, and I went and read it, and I was like, it tracks.
And you
I
were
get
like,
it.
"Thanks."
Yeah. I was glad I didn't read any James Purdy before because it maybe would have just become pastiche of James Purdy. But
It's great. People
Yeah.
haven't read it.
yeah, he's wonderful.
But I also thought At the Heart is a Lonely Hunter.
Well, that one I had read. Yeah, maybe
um,
her best work.
as the character of, Pew is someone because
Carson
they
McCullers.
make the, yes, of course, Carson McCullers. Because Pew doesn't speak, every person that Pew meets feels compelled to fill the space by talking to them. So the book is, in one way, just a series of monologues from strangers talking to a stranger and saying really intimate and shocking things and telling people in some ways their secrets. And so what do you think about maybe sometimes the stranger is necessary as sort of the human equivalent of the festival that they have where everyone gets to say, confess their sins, or their thoughts, or everything that normally you want to hide from people. But Pew is the living like receptacle for those things, even though that he never. I'm sorry, I think of Pew as a he. for some reason.
It's funny because I would default to he sometimes, but
And
then, like,
why is that? Is it because like
I don't know.
You're like, well, there's no.
But I've
boobs
had lots
described,
of people default to she. Because I'm female person, so I wrote this book, and some people think it's a she just naturally. I don't know. I mean, the character of Pew has no preference. There's no preferred pronouns, so you can't really get it wrong.
I can't insult Pew.
But we're in this, like, I feel like I've become like, even I like, I made them up, but I am almost like, oh, I'm sorry to misgender this like invisible person that like doesn't exist, but I feel like I don't want to do it wrong, or I don't want to insult them. But I have called them he many times. Anyway, I like this idea that you had about us having a Quaker meeting all of a sudden.
Oh yeah. I think this group is up for the Quaker meeting. So I don't know what time. Oh my gosh, so I 42. Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
Here's my thesis statement. So there's a part in the book of one of the characters is telling Pew about her son who stopped eating meat first and then becomes really concerned about eating plants and identifies with lions and is challenging these notions of boundaries between the human and the other in all of these really intense ways that maybe even forces them to think of themselves as like disappearing in some sense.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if the book in some ways is not so much about a conflict between people knowing or not knowing about each other, or people not showing things about themselves to each other out of fear or whatever mysteries that compel us to hide from each other or to missee each other. But in a broader sense, Pew's always interacting with the non-human. They save a little beetle, the husk of the beetle, and then they observe an old man petting moss and talking to moss, which me and my daughter Charlotte love to pet moss. I love that. And we say the same thing. We say, "Hi, moss."
Moss is amazing. Don't get me started about Moss.
Moss is amazing.
Yeah.
And if you notice these things, I mean, and trees, there's a lot of trees in the book, and clouds, and just ideas about, and fields. And maybe that Pew, in some ways, thinks of themselves within these landscapes. So in place of memories about where they came from, or who they are, in the sense of like a backstory of the human history, it seems like they're more comfortable thinking of themselves. Or not even more comfortable, but that's what's there. It's like, I can't fit into the human, but I do see that I connect into something with all of these others. I'm in community with all of these others. And maybe the book, for me, made me think about how the focus on trying to solve things between other humans misses the point if we're not also thinking about like maybe the things that are wrong within communities come from us defining the community as only being between humans and not thinking of the personhood of like, other things.
I almost feel like American society, as I've understood it in the last 36 years, it seems like we're kind of crowding like the human out of humanity. Like it's like even, the realms of the human, the things that we do that are, like we're in this courtyard and it's, like somebody built this and like we don't even totally understand like all the things that had to go into this moment of like this courtyard existing and us sitting here, and there's a laptop and there's like all these different things that like humanity has done and that are amazing if you think about them like, very specifically, and the amount of thought that had to go into like all the things that we kind of interact with casually every day, and all the individual human beings did all of that. But then now we've kind of I don't even know what, I think it's just a natural stage of like there being so much of us now, and like sort of taking over the resources of this planet, is that we even stop seeing what's amazing about humans. And so when we can't see what's like amazing about just like being a human, we definitely can't see what's amazing about being a bird or like a mosquito or anything like that. And if like when we, the less we can see like what's sort of phenomenal about like these kind of everyday phenomena, sort of the idea of society or like civilization sort of takes over and annihilates like the thing that made it to begin with. And maybe it's a natural process. Like I think I was getting really depressed about like global warming and just sort of like the kind of the crud of like this moment. And I mean, I constantly get upset and then like less upset about it. But I feel like it helps to think about like this is a stage, and like maybe there is like, not to be fatalist, because one, there's no use in that either, but like that there is a kind of like necessary like increase and decline and like things sort of expand and collapse over millennia, and sort of to think about ourselves less in terms of like how tragic it'll be in like 50 years if like this one thing is not the way it used to be, and more like, oh no, like in like 5,000 years, like think about like 5,000 years from now, like that. I feel like that you might be the sort of person that like stresses you out, or you might be the sort of person where it's like, oh, that like gives me some sense of relief, and I can like move through the day and like be a little bit like more here. I'm not sure if that really answered the question exactly, except that like I do think that it's, you want to be on, or I want everyone here and everyone in the laptop to be on the side of like remembering what's amazing about humans, because it's really easy right now to be really down on humans, but actually it's an amazing thing that's happened, and we're messing things up, but it doesn't mean that like amazing thing isn't still there, but also that amazing thing is also in all these other things too, all these other phenomena. And so maybe it does make sense that Pew would like identify more with like other living phenomena and maybe less on the human. Right now we're kind of like having a bad day, for the last 100 years.
I think that's a good note on which to open the Quaker meeting, where we can all choose to be silent. Nobody has to feel the pressure to speak, but if you feel moved to speak, just start speaking. And you can make a statement, or you can ask a question, or do whatever you want. But don't feel like you have to act like a person in a book talk. Just act like a person.
part of the meeting. Go over, that's okay.
The question in the chat is, I wonder what Quaker meetings are doing in like the era of Zoom. Do we have any Quakers here that can explain that? Like, what's a Zoom meeting, but it's Quaker? Shit. I really wish I'd been going to Quaker meetings all this pandemic. I'm sure we'll go back there someday. The question is, were there any elements or questions from your previous books that found themselves inside Pew? That's a nice question. I feel like I had this idea that you take some, like, okay, I tried to bake sourdough bread some years ago and it went really badly. But I do remember that one way that you'd make sourdough is you take like a little bit of one batter and then it basically makes the next batter. And so like every loaf of bread supposedly that you bake, which sounds nicing about it, but was not good for me, is that like there's this continuity, there's this like history, like, the loaf of bread that you make is related to the loaf of bread that you made 10 years ago. And that's amazing, right? And so I had this idea at one point that like there's a little bit of the batter of the last book that like goes into like making the next one. And I think that's like a little bit true, but it's sort of hard to see until you get like 10 years out. But I think more what I can see like in the kind of close-up moment of like, the recent history is that like the novel I wrote right before this one it took place over, is this right? I don't even remember. I can't even remember like what's happened. But no, it took place over like some year. There were a bunch of characters. There was just like a lot of different points of connection, and it was kind of, it felt unwieldy. I feel like when I was revising it, I was just like this it's like too much for me from the inside right now. And I was like, I just want a book that only follows one person and only takes place in like 1 week. And that was like my fantasy while I was revising the old one. I was like, someday I'm gonna write a book that like is not this much stuff. And so I think more it was like a complaint, So it's not so much like an idea, so much as like just a complaint. Or like there's like a break room in my head where like all the different parts of myself that have to work on books like go to like drink at the water cooler and like bitch about the boss and stuff. And if like they're like, next time I'm not doing this. I'm not doing it. And so that happened. Yeah.
It's like a bad breakup. You're like, I'm not gonna date that.
Right. Then to go the exact opposite. The exact opposite. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. We should be in.
Oh, okay. It's from my brother-in-law, the brilliant Peter Steves, the philosopher, so he always asks good questions. Isn't that the assumption behind, is that the beginning of the question? Dun-dun. Okay, I'd like to ask a question about narrative reason and the exercise Maryse gave us at the start of the evening. The conversation earlier touched on the question of backstory and the motivation for characters' actions, to know why this person is this way, etc. I know that Maryse likes Michael Haneke's films, and I believe too that this is part of what Haneke is saying. You, the reader viewer, want to know why this is happening and why this character is acting this way, but there is no real answer to these sorts of questions. So stop thinking about that and just take in what is happening. There are many different possible answers, each one not really the answer in any way, because there is no answer to why. This is against the ethos of our culture. Our culture wants us to say, I was abused as a kid and that's why I messed up, or this person is guilty of that crime because he experienced something in the past. We want easy ideas and rationality that is simple and directed in one necessary way. And yes, all of that is Enlightenment garbage we inherited and should reject. But when we narrate our lives, trying to keep the splintering self together and coherent, is there any other way to do this than to try to tell a story that makes sense? A story that moves from point A to point B in some way that hangs together, because the past and present link up. Isn't that the assumption behind Maryse's initial assignment for us? To think about what we wish were in our story and what we hope is never included in our story, thus trying to make our story a whole, coherent, meaningful unity. Perhaps the ultimate question for the speakers tonight is telling the story of some fictional character really essentially different from telling the story they tell about their own selves as they go through life. Yeah.
I mean, an impressive question, an impressive performance of the question for Maurice. Like, like this is the future where like you were the avatar for like your brother-in-law, and he was like, I want myself to be Maurice, and she will go into the event and ask the question in my voice. It's kind of spooky, but good. Anyway, yeah, I think there's times where I feel like there's something very personal about me, like in books, and maybe you feel this way too, where like occasionally you're like, oh, it's almost too much, or like, is it crazy that like I keep putting books out, or like and then people like, it's just weird, and it's like, but like myself is not like more inherently interesting or capable of doing this than somebody else's self. It's just like, this is the way things shook out, I don't know if that makes any sense, except that like I don't feel like responsible for, like I don't feel like I'm making an argument for a coherent self in a book, because I like, hopefully I feel like myself is sort of left out of it. And there was a point at which like I felt like afraid about what like writing books would say about me, or like people in my life, or like the way it might like kind of violate a person's privacy, like either my privacy or the privacy of someone that was in my life. But I think I've stopped feeling that way, partially because like I don't think that there's much that you can experience that almost everyone else in the world has also experienced. And so like, if I think like, oh, this is something that's really particular to me, and like, it's a big deal that I'm disclosing it, then I just think that's wrong. Like, I don't think there's anything that's like such a big deal and that you disclosing it is meaningful. It's because it's whatever you could say, like there's thousands of hundreds of thousands of millions of other people that would say the same thing, that think the same thing. Like our thoughts are not that particular, and our experiences are definitely not particular. Like everybody experiences death. Everybody experiences like the wonder birth of like waking up and going to sleep. Like we kind of have like these more in common, I feel like, than like memoirs would lead you to believe. Like,
Yes.
And I like but there's some trap in like the way that we describe things makes it seem more particular than it actually is. But I feel like what I want from a book is actually reading it and being like, oh, like either, and I think I agree. I didn't realize that I also thought that. It's like that's the experience that I like returning to in a book. Like oh wow, I didn't know that I also thought that, even though like I would have never put it in those words, and maybe that particular thing never happened to me or whatever. Or like I'm not capable of like that kind of language or something, but I didn't realize that like my brain was capable of understanding the world in those terms.
Yeah, that's
And
what
so
makes it so fun.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a kind of like universality that kind of helps you get away from this notion of, to go back to your brother-in-law's question, like creating a coherent self. Like we all have a coherent self. Like everybody has a coherent self. Like together we do.
Yeah.
But that's my argument for it. I feel like it would be a different question if you pose it to a bunch of memoirists. It'd be a totally different question.
It'd be like, please give me the 6-figure advance.
Yeah.
For this story, which I guarantee nobody has.
True. All of it.
All of it's true.
Yeah.
It's all really. I have a lot to say about that, but I'm gonna let other people speak if they so wish. Just speak, Deborah.
Different. But you brought up James Purdy, and I was thinking about the James Purdy that I've read, Color of Darkness, and and I don't really. I remember a few, right? And I don't remember exactly what happened. Stories, there's no particular story that, oh, I already know that really, what happened in that story really stayed with me. But I remember the feeling, and almost like an image. You're writing, do you think like that what you're going for, like an application feeling, or does that, I guess I'm wondering, like, do you go into it trying to evoke a specific feeling, or does that feeling just kind of generate itself almost
know. I don't know. I think it changes book to book for me, like what the kind of agenda is, but I read the way that you do, where like I don't like I read The Nephew by James Briddy, but more recently, like a few months ago, so I still kind of remember like what happens in that book. But I could see like, you know, ask me in a year what happens in that book, and I'd be like, I remember the town smells like ketchup, like, and that was described in great detail at one point. I found it to be memorable, and that like there's a nephew involved for sure called the nephew, but there's that, I think it's Toni Morrison quote of like, you don't remember the specifics of what a person said to you, but you remember the way they make you feel. And I think Toni Morrison said that, which I think is true. And I think it's very true for me in books. Like there's some people that I know and love that remember like in hyper detail, like lots of things from a book. And then there's other people like me and you that maybe remember fewer details, but maybe we're remembering like the essence of the book in a more kind of distilled way, maybe not. But I think for me, the like what's true across the books, at least when I'm like working on them or wanting to begin to work on them or something, is like I feel like I have some sort of like tension or like sense of something. Like it's almost like a sense of something that happened to me that definitely, I know it didn't happen to me, but it's like I feel like it did. Like I know if you have like maybe you have a dream some night that like is so powerful and you know you can't describe it to anybody else. There's no point. Like not even the person that loves you the most in this world can you really describe the dream to. It's just you and that dream and that feeling, and like maybe it messes you up for like a week, you know. And I feel like that it's not like I don't like have a dream and then write a book from the dream, but like it's almost like I slowly get that sense of like there's a creeping sense of like there's something that doesn't add up that I feel like I need to kind of like do math in public about somehow. Which sounds very tragic. Maybe it is, but yeah. But yeah, I think more of a sense of something, and maybe less even of a sense. Like I'm not even thinking ahead to like how the reader is going to read it, because it's like that's way too many steps ahead for me. Like I can't really think about it in those terms, but I can think about it in terms of like how can I be like really honest about whatever this feeling is.
Are there 6 participants right now? Hi.
Oh. Hi. It's so confusing. What's happening?
Sorry, I wasn't able to hear everything you were saying. Was that the last question anybody could ask?
You can ask a question.
You want to finish
Cool.
it out?
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much. This really reinvigorated my excitement about both of your work. I wanted to ask, how often do you lose interest in the premise of a whole project you're working on? And do you try to rekindle that interest, or do you adjust the premise?
The question I think for you guys was how often do Maurice and I lose interest in the premise of something we're working on? Like, I mean, I guess maybe I don't approach a premise that often. I feel like I like just am constantly like just working on things that don't necessarily have a premise, you know, we're like, yeah, I'm just trying to make sense of the world as I see it. And if I felt like I had to have a premise all the time, I would feel like a job. Yeah. But,
I feel the same way. I mean, instead of thinking about it, well, as I see it, I'm always thinking about, I just want to find out how these other people see it. But I don't know until I've written the thing.
Yeah.
Maybe
I would say I also
about-
have like a graveyard of unfinished stories for sure. Like there's
Right.
lots of things that like I start to work on and I'm but then I forget about. And I wouldn't think of them like as I'm losing interest in the premise so much as like my life is kind of going in a direction that makes me not the person that can necessarily write that story anymore. And that's like not necessarily a failure of like, oh, well, that wasn't a good premise, or like I've lost interest, or like I'm not a good writer. So it's just like, well, life, you know, like, you know, somebody's in the hospital now. So like, I don't really want to write that story that like takes place on a baseball field. It's just like, feels very far from me, you know, or whatever it is. So you can't really plan for the things that are going to happen around you. And I think that ends up kind of dictating what you can work on. But maybe that's a good closing statement. Oh, okay.
Can you tell me about can you guys just give 2 authors that you feel are seriously underread that just suggest
Underread authors.
Myself. Seriously underread and underappreciated. I would say my latest one is Robert Gluck. I don't know how to say his last name. GLU, over to you, CK. He wrote a great novel called Marjorie Kemp, which I hand sold to Jesse earlier. Which, you know, he was like one of these new narrative guys, gay, 80s, 90s, but writing really high concept, but not annoying concept works that I feel like have the best fusion of someone really working with a structure, an idea about how a book should be written, but that feels totally organic to what the book is about, which I think is really hard to do. And I don't know how to, I mean, I don't write that way anyway, but I wish I could, because it sure does make Robert look really smart. But it's also really emotional, and I feel like he finds a way through these very elaborate sort of Baroque structures to say something that's really true. He's also just really honest in a way that's not meant to shock, which I also think is really hard to do, to talk about sex and the body and taboo subjects in a way that doesn't come off like, oh, this impress me with how dark they are. You never describe his work as dark or transgressive, but it is. And yeah, so
Subtly transgressive. I will go for transgressive at times, which is a writer that I just discovered in the past couple months called Matilda B. Sycamore. She has this book called The Freezer Door that came out late last year. That's like about a billion things, and also like so specific and really wonderful. And it felt like spending time with people in a way that books don't normally feel that way to me. But also there's a conversation between an ice cube and an ice cube tray that like runs throughout the whole book that I thought was like just wonderful, that like stays with me. Like every once in a while I'm like, what would the ice cube and the ice cube tray say about this? And then the other one is I feel like, yeah. Natalie Leger, is that how you say her name? Natalie Leger. She has a trilogy of books. She's a French writer that has been published by the Dorothy Project here and translated into English. And she has a trilogy of books that started with the one about Barbara Loden that or it started here. Actually, I think it was actually the second book in French, but it was the first book here, called Sweet for Barbara Loden. So that's good. Wonderful. So about the actress Barbara Loden and her film Wanda, which she made in the 70s, late 70s, like wrote, directed, and starred in. And it's like one of my favorite films. Discovered it after I read that book. But then there's 2 more books that are part of the trilogy that are also about strange women that were behaving oddly in their moment and were misunderstood, but also are very important and very like present and contemporary. One of them was a kind of performance artist in Italy in the last 20 years. She's died now. And the other one was the most photographed woman of the 19th century, whose name I also can't remember, but they're wonderful. Anyway, they're like memoir, and their history, and their nonfiction, and their fiction, and they're like everything. It's like a complete, like you don't know what you want to eat for lunch and you end up having a little of everything. It's like, that's the book, you know? Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you to
Thanks for having us. Thanks for coming.
Thank you all out there in the audience and all of you virtually that tuned in tonight. You can purchase copies of both of these books either here at the store or on our website, exileandbookbill.com. We'll be happy to ship all over the country for you. And I want to thank you guys so much. This was awesome.
Thanks.
Let's do it again next week. You guys
We're
are
in
great.
people. Yeah.
Cool.
Every
Just a week.
Tuesday.
Exactly.
Until we're dead.
That would be okay. But thank you all for tuning out there and in here in the machine. And have a good night. Thanks. Thank you, everyone. And we have copies for sale right outside, not for you guys, but right outside the door here if you guys want to purchase a copy. You guys will be happy to sign?
Yeah.
Yeah, personalized, all that stuff.
For sure.
Thank you. Good night. Good
Bye.
night.